Jade and John Reynolds, The Power of Your Story.
Good morning, everybody. It's great to see you, and I'd like to start by introducing Jade and John, and also thanking you both for coming. It's a real joy to have you with us this morning. Jade and John are theology graduates. They're podcast hosts, authors, and Christians and parents, and and you guys have encouraged me through your kind of online ministry and online content creation, and I know that you also have a significant social media following, and I'm just really excited to hear more of your story this morning. I know that it will be very encouraging to others. And so, I just wanted to thank you and to hand over to you. Thank you.
Thanks, Katie. We're so happy to be here this morning and just share, a bit of our story with you. It's called The Power of Your Story, what we're talking about today. And so I'm going to just kick off with sharing a bit of my story with you. You probably can't see from the video, but I'm in a wheelchair. And so I'm just going to give a bit of background to that. So taking you back to my childhood, I grew up in a Christian family. At the age of 10, I decided to get baptised because I had my own faith by that point. And then 2 weeks before my 13th birthday, something completely unexpected happened to me. It was a normal day. I was at a park with my dad and my younger sister. And I remember being on the swings and I was swinging. It was time to go home. So I jumped off the swing. And as I jumped off, I all of a sudden felt shooting pains down my thighs. And the pain was so intense that I actually lay on the grass and the grass was wet. So my dad thought I was messing about. He said, "Come on, Jade, get up. We've got to go home." And I just said, "Oh, I feel very strange." And he was like, "Well, come on, get up." So I managed to get up to my feet and I could see a bench across the park. And so I just thought, I just need to sit down. I feel very, very weird. And so as I started to make my way to the bench, I could feel the power draining out of my legs. So it was almost like I was becoming a puppet. It was like I couldn't coordinate my legs how I wanted to. I managed to get to the bench and I couldn't get back up again. So that resulted in my dad piggybacking me home and then taking me to A&E. And at the time, we didn't really realise what was going on. It was very strange, nothing had happened. And so even when we got to A&E, the nurses thought I was making it up. They thought maybe I was, trying to seek attention. And it was only after I couldn't move my legs at all that they took me seriously. In fact, one of the nurses tried to pick me up under my arms, let go of me, and I just collapsed into a heap on the floor. So she knew then that I wasn't faking it. And so I was rushed in. I had tests, I had x-rays, I had MRIs, and everything was coming back normal. They couldn't explain what was going on with me. But within that first 24 hours, I lost all movement in my legs and about 90% of the feeling. And they didn't know why. They didn't know whether it was going to travel up me. They didn't know. And so for weeks, I was in hospital and I didn't know what was happening to me. And it was only after a few weeks, after having another MRI, that they saw there was damage on my spinal cord. And they believe, and it's so rare, but they believe I got acute transverse myelitis. So it's a bit of a mouthful, but it's a very rare autoimmune condition. And it's so rare, they don't fully know why it happens, but they think that I had a normal cold virus in my body, and my immune system went to attack the cold virus and got confused, and I attacked my own spinal cord. So when I jumped off the swing and I felt those pains in my thighs, that was my spinal cord swelling up and rubbing against the vertebrae in my back. So that caused the damage to my spinal cord, that inflammation. And initially they thought I might get better. They said, some people do recover from this. And they said to me, you'll probably end up walking with a walking stick. And being 13 at the time, I was horrified. I was like, I can't go back to school with a walking stick. Oh, I don't want to stand out. I mean, now I'd love to have a walking stick. I mean, you know, but it's a funny perspective, isn't it? And so they said, keep trying to wiggle your toes. You'll know then that you're getting better. And I kept trying to wiggle my toes day after day. I had no improvement. And so after about 4 months in hospital, they said to me, Jade, you know, it looks like you're not going to recover. You're not going to walk again. And that was a shock to me and my family. But I think by that point, I'd already realised, I'd had enough time to realise, okay, I'm not getting better. This is probably it, and I'm probably not going to recover. So I did have time to process that a bit. And all of a sudden, my world was completely changed. I went from, you know, having a very carefree childhood to all of a sudden having all these challenges and having the label disabled put on me. And it was not just physical challenges, learning to sit up again, learning to use a wheelchair, learning to dress myself, but it was mental as well. It was, you know, oh, you know, I'm not going to get better and I'm going to have to deal with these health issues for the rest of my life. And that was a big mental strain. And then the more unexpected one was the societal challenges that I had, because all of a sudden I didn't know, where do I fit in society? All of a sudden I just couldn't take for granted that I could go to places. All of a sudden it was like I felt not welcome. It was, everything was a big challenge. It was, you can't just go out somewhere. Is there accessibility? Is there a disabled toilet? Is there, and I'm sure a lot of you can relate to that. And it was really hard, and going back to school and just all the adjustments that needed to be made in my life at the time. And, you know, at that time I did feel really that God was still with me in it, but I didn't understand why it had happened. And a lot of people around me didn't understand, well, why would God let this happen? And so for the first few years I was in survival mode. I was literally just trying to get by day after day, just get through the day. And it was only when I was 17 that I went to a Christian Youth Festival, and I'd gone previous years, and there was always a meeting where it was praying for healing. Now, my home church had been amazing. I mean, the support me and my family had, you know, spoke volumes to everyone around us. All the nurses would comment on, wow, like you always have so many visitors, and wow, you know, they're doing everything for you, they're cooking for your family. That, you know, I think it was such an amazing testament. But there was also this tension around healing, and for those first few years it was very much, don't worry, God's going to be glorified in your life because you're going to be healed, and that's what's going to glorify God. So don't worry, you know, that's what your hope needs to be in, healing, and it will happen. And so I had that going on for years. And so when I was 17, it was a healing meeting again. I always felt really self-conscious during those meetings because being in a wheelchair, I stood out, excuse the pun, but I stood out, and I'd always get a lot of people wanting to pray for me. And I'd feel a lot of pressure to be healed, to make other people happy, which is so weird when you think about it. But I wanted to, when they said to me, oh, can you feel anything after praying for me? I was like, I don't want to say no to them. I want to say yes, you know, and I felt a lot of pressure. And I remember this one time just praying, had a lot of people around me praying for my physical healing. And it was a very intense time of prayer. And I did meet with God powerfully in that meeting, but I didn't get physically healed. And so I went home and carried on with life. And to the outside world, it looked like nothing had changed. But I had encountered God in such a powerful way, because he had met with me and he had healed a lot of the emotional trauma I'd been through. And almost I got the feeling that God's okay with me, because up until that point I felt like, oh, God can't be okay with me because he wants to heal me and he hasn't healed me, so there's a problem here. And so for the first time ever, I knew God doesn't have a problem with me not being healed. And so a year later, I went back to the same festival, and a man approached me. He was crying, and he said, Jade, do you recognize me? And to be honest, I didn't recognize him. I panicked because I thought, I don't know who he is, but he knew who I was. And he said, I was part of the big group that was praying for you last year for your healing. And I thought, oh, he's gutted that I'm not healed. He's really probably really sad to see me in a wheelchair still. And he said, I'm so sorry, I'm getting emotional, but it's just so amazing to see you here this year. Like, honestly, it's, you know, I can't get over it, because he said, your healing wasn't the miracle, your faith is the miracle. And I'm so encouraged that you're still here, you're still seeking God, and you're still living your life. And he was so impacted by that. And for me, that was a big shift in how I was thinking, because up until that point, like I said, I always thought the goal was going to be, I'm going to be healed, then I can live for God, then I can do amazing things for God. But actually, that's not how God works. And your, you know, limitations, your disabilities, your chronic illnesses, none of that is a problem for God. It's not a problem, it's not an obstacle. He's not surprised by anything. So he always knew I was going to become disabled. It wasn't, oh no, Jade's become disabled, what are we going to do? Plan B? This is plan A. God always knew this was going to happen to me. But he knew that through this, his name would be glorified. And I think we sometimes get so caught up on what we think God should be doing that we actually miss out on what he is doing, because he's always doing something. You know, it's never, life never gets put on pause, regardless of what you're going through. God is always doing something. And he can use you in any circumstance. He can use you in any situation. And he's not just going to use you in spite of your disability or your illness, or he's going to use you because of that, because that's how God works. So I just want to share with you a verse that I find really encouraging, and it's 2 Corinthians chapter 12 verse 9 to 11, and it says, but he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. And I think that's such an encouraging verse for us, because God uses our weaknesses. And I think as someone with a disability, I'm very aware of my weaknesses. I'm very aware of my limitations. And sometimes I can find that frustrating. But actually, if that's going to keep pointing me to God, then that's amazing. And actually, that's the only thing that really matters. And so I think we need to think differently about our circumstances and our disabilities and our illnesses and anything bad that happens in life, because at the end of the day, we're all weak. Whether you're able-bodied or disabled, we're all weak. That's the truth. We all need other people, and we all need God. And I think, if anything, we, as a disabled person, it's actually, I feel like we've kind of got a bit of a secret there, of we've actually discovered a bit of truth there, because we know we have to get help from others. That's not an option for us. We have to receive help. We're vulnerable, and I think in our vulnerability we can actually experience true intimacy, and that's with others around us, our friends, our family, because, you know, I've had to be carried places, I've had to have all sorts of crazy things, but my friends have helped me to live my life, and intimacy comes out of that vulnerability. And that also is the same with God. Like, we can actually have an experience of God that is unique to our situations, because we know we need him. And so that actually is empowering rather than a negative, which sometimes in our society it can be seen as. So yeah, John's going to talk more about kind of how we've been sharing our story on social media. But for me, I just wanted to give a bit of a background of why I have the confidence that I have, and it's because I know I don't need working legs for God to use me, and he's using me because I don't have working legs, and actually there's so much goodness and fulfillment that can still come even after having you know a really traumatic health issue. So yeah, just to encourage anyone out there who's in a similar situation to me, like, there is hope. We're not without hope, and God can use us no matter what.
Yeah. And That's brilliant, Jade. If you've got like more questions or more thoughts about that, obviously we're really looking forward to the Q&A and things. But as part of starting social media, as that grew, we found that we had loads of questions that were asked, and Jade shared some of the answers to those today. But we were asked, like, why is your wife in a wheelchair? Will she ever walk again? Was she disabled when you met? Even questions like that border on a little bit intrusive, to be honest, like, how have you had kids? So well, when a mummy and daddy love each other very much. But we've basically put all of those into this book called Able to Laugh. So if you do want to look into that, it's on Amazon. It kind of goes through almost more in depth what Jade has shared. So if you are interested in hearing even more, you can find that on Amazon. And the reason I share that as well is we've kind of used the most frequently asked questions we get through social media and use them as the kind of structure for the book. So it may be that if you don't get a chance to ask your question, or we don't get a chance to answer it this morning, you might find it in there if that's something you're interested in. But the reason we wrote that is because we started on social media April 22.
Yeah.
And I just told a funny story one day. I didn't set out to be like, let's be disability activists, or let's be online evangelists, or let's be anything really. I was a youth pastor at the time and had been for about a decade. And I shared a funny story about my son, and it just did quite well. I think I had about 500 followers at the time, and it got about 30, 40, 50,000 views. And I was like, oh, wow. Suddenly I got a couple of thousand followers, and I was like, I've got more followers on this than any other platform. And then I told the story about our first date, which I'll tell you very quickly now. We went to the cinema, and I, being an able-bodied person who hadn't really been part of the world of disability, I didn't even think to check that the cinema was disabled accessible. And the second we got there were like 3 steps, and I was like, oh no, what a dreadful first date. And Jade, knowing a bit more about that world, was like, oh no, they've got one of the little platform lifts. You just need to go and tell the guy to grab the key, and then we can use it and we'll be able to get in. So I went over to the guy and was like, sorry, I'm just here with a lady in a wheelchair and we need to use the platform lift. And he just looked at me for what felt like about 3 minutes, like just open mouth, like, and I was like, and he went, yeah, you need a key. And I was like, well, she doesn't come with one. Is there any chance you can go and have a look? And he was like, oh yeah, all right. And he went off to get this key. He got her into the platform lift. We went up to like the sort of foyer bit, ordered our sweets and drinks, had to remortgage obviously to afford those. But then we went into, we were just about to go into the screen, and he looked at the cinema tickets because we were going to see The Great Gatsby. And he looked at the cinema tickets, and he was like, he printed them off, he'd given us our sweets and drinks, and then he just went, you're in screen. Oh. And I was like, oh, don't tell me the lift isn't working or something. And he said, what lift? Because it was a listed building, and so they hadn't been able to put a lift in for the steps. Now, there was about, let's say 200 steps to make me sound macho. No, there was about 30 steps, I reckon.
Yeah.
And it was a first date. Now, I didn't want Jade to think I was weak, and I also didn't want her to feel like she was heavy, because it was a first date and she's not heavy, and I am a bit weak. So I was like, right, we don't want this to ruin it. I thought, it's not really a romantic first date if I say, should I go and watch it and just fill you in after? You're right down here for a couple of hours, aren't you? So I carried her up the steps. Now, when I shared this story on TikTok, people were like, oh, they literally thought it's the most romantic thing they'd ever heard in their lives. For us, because we met at university and I'd seen other people carry Jade, like, it just wasn't that much of a big deal. Like, I think if I hadn't known her at all, or if it had been a blind date and stuff, maybe a bit different. But because you were just used to it, so it was more practical than romantic. And I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir this morning. I'm sure many of you are like, yeah, that's sometimes what has to happen. But people couldn't get over it. Some people, although, did think it was the classic, like, princess carry. Some people were like mistakenly thought it was like a fireman's carry, like I slung her over my shoulder like a sack of potatoes or something. But no, so I think because it was a princess carry, people were like, this is so romantic. And we left the wheelchair downstairs. They were like, we can look after that in the foyer, and then if you come down, we'll get it ready for you afterwards. But because then I carried her up these steps and gone into like screen 3 or whatever, there was no context for anyone else when I walked in with her. So I could see like women looking at their boyfriends like, why don't you do that for me, you jerk? Like they were just sort of, just again, really romantic. Anyway, I got Jade, I put Jade into the seat, and I sat obviously next to her. And at the end of the film, we still do this now. I wait for everyone else to file out of the cinema first, because I don't want to if I have to carry her at all, I don't want to navigate the hustle and bustle of everybody else coming out while I'm carrying her. It doesn't feel very safe. And the last thing I want is for me to get knocked down the stairs and then suddenly I'm in a wheelchair as well, and she leaves me because she's a shallower person than I am. And so I waited for everyone to leave, and then I picked her up again. And just as I picked her up, I suddenly heard voices at the back, and I was like, oh, hang on a minute, like we're not the last ones. And there were three kind of old ladies at the back who were like gradually walking down. But I don't know if they'd had a bit to drink or they were just a bit excited about having seen Leonardo DiCaprio. But on the film, he wasn't in the cinema with us. And he and they started calling things out, like they were a little bit giddy. One of them was like, oh, and they say romance is dead. And the other one went, that's The Great Gatsby, which doesn't even make sense. But we were really laughing. And Jade's got a bit of a wicked sense of humour as well. As I took her down the stairs back to the wheelchair in the foyer, and I put her in her chair, they were still sort of a bit giddy, calling things out, singing songs by this point. And as I wheeled her around, Jade said it'd be really funny if I just look up at them and just shake my head, like really disapproving. So as I wheeled her out, she just went, and they were like absolutely like mortified. Anyway, that was the first story that I shared that went really big on TikTok. It got 2 or 3 million views, I think, in the end. And suddenly I had 50, 60,000 followers, and it just went a bit crazy, and it's kind of continued ever since. So through TikTok, Facebook and Instagram, we've now got just over 1 million followers, which just feels crazy because it just started through silly stories, really. The reason I share that story is firstly to give you a bit of a background into not just Jade's story, but also a little bit of our story. We've now got 2 children. We've been married 9 years on Thursday. We've got an 8-year-old and a 5-year-old. And on social media, we basically just share our lives a little bit. Some of the stories will be funny things, like her daughter, when she was about 2 and had been walking a while, at one point tried to give Jade a walking tutorial because she didn't understand. She was like, Mummy, why can't you walk? Because it's very easy, Mummy. You just do this. And she was like, you just do one leg and then the other leg. And she was like, just trying to understand, because for her, every other milestone she'd hit was something that we could already do, when she finally fed herself with a spoon, or when she finally could shower herself, or whatever. We could already do that. So for her, it's strange that suddenly she felt like she was ahead of Mummy. And so we'll share those kind of moments online as well. Some of the stories are nothing to do with disability. Some of them are just, Arily, our 5-year-old, is very sassy. So it's a little bit, I think, a little bit like Faith. Look, I think the beauty of what we've been able to do through sharing funny stories is kind of the low-level witnessing that doesn't feel like suddenly you're bashing people over the head with, you should care more about disability. What are you doing to campaign for the fact that there are buildings with no lifts? Or what are you doing? You don't care about people if it doesn't affect you. It doesn't come across like that at all. It also doesn't come across like, I guess, faith-wise battering people either. It's a low-key way of doing it, mostly because we didn't start through evangelism or through disability activism. Everyone who followed us initially just for funny stories. And we think there's a real place in the kingdom of God for that as well. When I became a Christian around 17, 18, we had a neuroscientist in our church. And because I was so new to faith, at one point I was toying over being a stand-up comedian, or at least trying that. Then when I became a Christian, I felt actually I really love youth work. And there's an overlap between those two. Like, you don't only want to entertain young people. You obviously also are being a role model and encouraging them in their relationship with God, and maybe introducing them to God or discipling them. But there's definitely an element of people want to enjoy. You'll listen so much more to a talk that you enjoy, or a talk that makes you laugh. And in fact, that's what this neuroscientist at our church said to me. It was one of the biggest encouragements I ever got when I was about 18, because when I came into church, I was like, I feel like I've got to be on my best behavior. And suddenly I realized, actually, people have got a sense of humor in church. And then when I started working for the church and doing funny videos, even for church, I remember him saying, the beauty of humor is neurologically, when you laugh, it opens up your sort of neurological pathways to be more open to what that person is saying to you. Like, it's impossible to hate someone who you find funny, even if you don't think they're necessarily a good role model. You don't dislike them, even if you wouldn't make them your closest friend because they're a bit crazy, maybe. You still don't dislike them. And so I think there's a real power in humour and teaching and combining those things to help actually change people, or encourage people towards God, or encourage people to actually think about how they view disabled people, etc. And so I think that those things are really important. Some of our humour as well is even, and Jade will often come up with these jokes, but it's self-deprecating stuff around disability. So we had one where Jade was wearing my camouflage jacket, and I was like, I say something like, why do wives always want to borrow your clothes? Like, my wife's taken my camouflage jacket and now I can't find her anywhere. She can hide, but she can't run. And it was a joke that kind of, it's a classic silly joke, but the reason we think that's important, it really can divide people, and we totally understand that. Usually it's only people who aren't disabled who find it offensive. Almost always. I think we've had maybe 1 or 2 people say, I'm in a wheelchair, actually I don't like that. And even those were, I don't think we've got any of those in the first couple of years, but even those have been only recently. The reason I think that's important is I went to an all boys school, and I grew up where you only made fun of the people who you loved, who you knew could take it, who almost you didn't look down on, if that makes sense. Like, there were some times where if the humor turned towards people who maybe had a lower social status, or kind of, it almost felt cruel. And I don't see Jade as a lower social status, and I don't see people with disabilities as a lower social status. I think you've got to have the relationship with them to make that joke. I don't think you can just start mocking people in public who you don't know, because then that can seem very, very cruel. But because we've got the relationship, what are the chances that me as an able-bodied man genuinely doesn't like disabled people and is trying to be really cruel when I've married a woman who's disabled? Doesn't make any sense. So almost everybody recognizes Jade must be in on it. Jade finds it funny too. And we think there's a real power in that, like I say, in almost elevating that. Like, you don't make fun of the things that, you don't make fun of things if they're too raw. And I get that when it's brand new, maybe that's hard. But I think also being able to, it removes the elephant in the room. The reason I share all this, and where we come on to, I think, your guys' story is, everyone has a platform. It might not be that you've got tons of social media followers. You might not even be on social media. Although I would say, if that's something that you think you could do, it's a really cool way for people who might find accessibility, or being on stage, or even getting out the house sometimes, yet still have that desire to share their story. It's a really cool way of doing it, because now you can share it literally like this, that we haven't had to leave our house and things. I am dressed, but we haven't had to leave our house today. And the same with videos. There'll be times when you can just do that. You might want to share your story of your disability. You might want to do what we've done and just share funny stories. You might want to do gardening, or you can share anything, any of your passions. You can make videos about them if you want to. And it can reach people that you would never otherwise reach, which I think is really, really cool. And it's the same with faith, and it's the same with sharing your story. I love that Jade said that intimacy comes through vulnerability, because I know it's a really vulnerable thing to share your story. When we were writing Able to Laugh, our book, the early chapters are obviously more to do with Jade. As it goes on, it's a bit more shared as we talk about marriage or dating and marriage and things. But early on, I didn't even know Jade until she was 20.
Yeah.
And so early on, it's more Jade, and there was a vulnerability to that. Like, there were times when I think, like, even friends had been asking you for years before we had a bit of more of a platform, and therefore probably the opportunity to write the book. Friends were saying to you for years, like, you should write your story. And I remember chatting to Jade at one point and saying, it is a lot, though. It is a lot to think through all these things and to share it, and to go through some of those times. And some of that can be really healing, and some of that can bring up fresh stuff that you then have the opportunity to give to God and to heal. But I think there's such a power in sharing your story that I honestly believe, when you're in the place to do that, and there might be people in the conversation and on this Zoom today who are very, very newly disabled, and to even think about is still really painful. So this isn't an encouragement. This isn't me telling you you should be doing it. It's up to anybody how they do it and when they do it. But I do think there is a real power in it. I remember there was a guy who came to uni when we first started, and I just could not stand him. Like, and I know that sounds so unchristian. We were at Bible college as well, so judge me if you like. I probably deserve that, but I just couldn't. He just felt so arrogant and so egotistical. And I was a second year, they'd just come in. When I came in my first year, I wanted to be really humble. You don't know what everyone else is like. You don't want to walk in like you own the place. And it felt like that's what he'd done. I was like, I just can't stand this guy. And then we used to have a thing with where we shared our stories. We did shared our testimonies, and we prayed for each other. And each week someone else would share their testimony. This guy shared his testimony about how he'd just been through so much. He'd lost his dad when he was at a young age. He'd been through quite a lot of stuff, and suddenly he realized, okay, like, I've judged somebody when I don't know them, and actually if I'd been through that stuff, maybe I'd have defense mechanisms like perceived arrogance, or maybe I would try to show this idea that I'm super confident when really I'm just hurting. And it became so much harder to judge him harshly. And I think it's true for all of us. There is a vulnerability in sharing our story, but there's also an opportunity to love others and be loved. It's very difficult to love people you don't know, I would say. There's a phrase that I've heard before, is like, to be known is to be loved, and to be loved is to be known. Otherwise, what's the point in either of those things? And so it's very difficult, to do that unless you know somebody. So I think your story is so powerful. Like, you have no idea who it might meet. You might think, I don't really have much of a story. You might think that I didn't go through something big. I've just got slightly older and now my body is failing me, or I was born this way and therefore there is no dramatic moment that's going to be super intriguing to people. That's not true. And not only that, you don't have to appeal to the masses. Your story might just help 4 or 5 people, or one person that has been through the same thing, who feels like no one understands what it's like. No one has been through what I've been through. I am so alone in this world. And then you sharing your story has a massive impact on them and encourages them. I'm sure that's why the Bible talks about not giving up meeting together, because we can all share that journey with each other and be known by one another. And so there's nothing wrong with aiming high. There's nothing wrong with thinking, I would love to have a big social media following, or I'd love to do stand-up comedy, or I would love to be known for sharing my story, however that looks like. But I would say, when we were chatting about this, Jade, actually, let's pretend Jade didn't say it. I came up with this, guys, because if you like it, I kind of want the credit. Jade said, you should aim for significance over status. And I think that's such an important point. Like, there are loads of people who have high status, but they're not really doing that much significant. And that's why I think we judge people who get their fame for weird reasons, or unwholesome reasons, or unhealthy reasons. Whereas when you're doing something significant, it doesn't matter whether everybody knows your name in England or in your church or in your street. It doesn't really matter at all. If you're doing something that's significant for people, that's the most important thing. I just want to end very quickly by saying that I can fall into this trap massively. It's very easy to feel like, to inspire people or influence people, it's all about showing what a main character you are. So, like, I'm the main character, and these are the things I've done, and this is how my life has gone, and if I can do it, you can do it too. Inspiring. Wow. Most of the time, I don't know if that really works. Most of the time when I see people, like, if I was trying to be a musician, when I see people who are musicians, I just think, oh gosh, they're so much better than me, or I could never do. Like, it almost can work the other way. I think the best people are the helpers. Like, every story has a main character. Every story has Frodo or Harry Potter or the main character, but they would be nowhere without their helpers, without Gandalf or Samwise Gamgee or Ron and Hermione. Like, you need those helpers, and actually they're the most important people in the world. Like, Jesus, and what's fascinating about Jesus is he is both those things. He is the main character. He's literally the main character of the universe. He's God written into the world and our story. But then he says it's how you serve people that you'll be judged. And he's a servant king. So he literally chooses to lower himself almost from main character to helper. How can I help you? And that's why people are like, you can't, that's why Peter's like, you can't wash my feet. Like, you're the main character. Like, we should be helping you. And Jesus is like, no, if I don't wash your feet, you can't inherit the kingdom of God. If you don't receive my help, you're going nowhere. And we have that opportunity as Christians to be those helpers for other people, to talk less about our achievements and more about how we can unlock other people to I guess, achieve the things they want to, but also then in turn go on to help other people, to help other people, to help other people. So I know there's probably loads of like information in there, but just to I guess summarize that, aim for significance over status and work out how you can be the helper, not just the main character. And I know that can be hard given different abilities that we'll have on this chat. It can be hard to help people when you're going through a tough time. But one very quick thing, because I think this makes the point really well. People often assume online I'm Jade's carer. Like, people will be like, oh, is it really hard, like caring for your wife? And so one of the chapters in the book, we've completely subverted that, because I found out I had ADHD about a year ago. Jade helps me absolutely as much as I help her. When I'm absolutely overstimulated by the loud noises and distractions and I'm not getting anything done and I'm late for everything and I've got task paralysis and I just can't focus and my mind is going crazy, she's like, have 20 minutes. I've got the kids. I've got you. I've got this. You're fine. And so there's always ways that we can be helping other people. Even if it's harder for Jade to do certain things with the kids, there's loads of things
even if it's just listening.
Even if it's just...
That's really... I do that a lot with him. So.
She does. that was Jade's compliment, encouragement, but also passive-aggressive way of saying, wrap it up, son. So yeah, I hope that all makes sense. And yeah, thanks very much. I hope that's helpful.
That is extremely helpful. Thank you so much to you both for sharing that.